Our next speaker is Nayeli Jimenez, who is the senior campaigner at leadnow.ca. Nayeli is originally from Mexico and works as a campaigner and designer in unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories, which is Vancouver. She has been organizing for climate justice locally and internationally for the last 7 years, mostly focusing on opposition to the fossil fuel expansion, as well as migrant justice, which are intimately tied with one another. She has a background in communication design and has dedicated most of her creative career to projects related to social and environmental justice. And Lead Now is a social media company that really brings ideas and concepts and news to the public and to youth, which is affecting all of us. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you, Nayeli.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to have been asked to speak here today, not just on behalf of Lead Now, but again, as a young person who has been doing this work for a while and just knowing how overwhelming these topics can be, but that is very important for us to mobilize. So yeah, kicking off, Yusuf mentioned that I'm based in the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh unceded territories. I want to acknowledge the land I'm on. I think when we're speaking specifically about climate justice, it's very, very important for us to not only acknowledge the land, but center Indigenous rights and Indigenous sovereignty, because as we're seeing right now, as we have seen for decades, when it comes to climate impacts, it is those Indigenous frontline communities who are impacted the most. We're seeing it right now with wildfires. And also right now, I think here in so-called Canada, we're going over this really strong sense of reckoning with colonial history and genocide of Indigenous people. So I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that and also recognize that this is lifelong work, that it's not just when the news cycle is talking about it and then we move on. We don't get to move on. We have to do this work constantly, and we have to show up in solidarity, which I think a lot of people here are very like-minded and are taking action and supporting communities. But I think it just, has to be said, I think, over and over again, that that's our responsibility as settlers. So a little bit about myself and why climate justice. So I was born and raised in Mexico. And when I first heard about climate justice as a concept, I was very overwhelmed. I think like a lot of us have been when we hear about it for the first time. But I think the main thing was just realizing that the most vulnerable communities in my own country, which is a country that relies really heavily on agriculture and even oil extraction, were going to be heavily impacted by climate impacts. And that was very overwhelming. It was that shift from hearing about climate change and caring about it, but also realizing that we would not meet our targets to the scale that we have to, or to respond to the crisis to the scale that we have to, unless we frame it from a human rights perspective. And so that's why I decided to dedicate my life to this fight, which is not easy, but there's also a lot of joy and community in it. And, usually when I get asked to speak about these issues and share my thoughts, I think about that tone. Right now, I think it's really hard for us to keep a passive voice when it comes to climate. I mean, we're all experiencing impacts. It has become deeply personal here in Canada. The effects of climate change, we're seeing it in BC. I mean, we have been seeing it for the past few years, but especially this time. And it's really hard not to be enraged. It's really hard not to feel anxious. It's hard not to grieve the fact that there are these massive systems like capitalism and colonialism that are fueling this crisis that is disproportionately affecting our communities of color. And so it's hard to not focus on that. It's hard not to think about the governments in power who are okay declaring a climate emergency one day and then approving a massive pipeline the next day. It's hard not to think about all the communities who don't have access to drinking water in a country as wealthy as Canada. But despite all of that, we really need to hold on to the fact that we know that a better future is possible, that we truly believe that, and that we're all here to fight for it. We wouldn't be on this call. We wouldn't be talking about all these ideas and ways to mobilize if we didn't truly believe that. And so I just want to remind everyone that in this moment where we're overwhelmed by really dire climate news over and over again, and not just climate, but the pandemic and inequality, we need to really remind ourselves that we're part of this huge movement that really is mobilizing itself through love and compassion and community, and that a better world is possible. And so I just find that grounding every time, because it is hard not to be, angry, frustrated, worried, but at the same time, it's important for us to feel that and turn that into action. And I think that reflects what everyone before me has said so far. And to me, that's what climate justice is about recognizing that we all have there's a lot at stake. We all have something to lose, but it is ultimately a lot of those communities who had very little to do with the crisis, who are being impacted the most, and who are the ones who are suffering the most, especially in the global South. And so it's very evident, of course, that yes, we all have something to lose. We're experiencing it right now. Like I said, we're seeing, communities having to flee their countries only to be met with violence at borders. We hear stories about sea level rise, like that's happening. It's not some distant dystopian future. It's happening right now. We're living it right now. And one thing that I will never get tired of saying, and I think, and I mean this in the sense of like, when we're building movements that are very rooted in community, we need to also recognize that I think, at least here in Canada, the environmental movement has been largely led, by big organizations, by white, male, highly educated people. And really what we should be doing is centering the stories and the experiences of those affected the most, those racialized communities on front lines, Indigenous communities on front lines, like that is key. Their demands are the ones that need to be heard, and we need to be rallying up behind them. And so that's one thing that I say and I like constantly think about, because when we show up in spaces where we all care about things, it's also important to realize, well, what caused the crisis to begin with? There are these massive systems of repression that have a say in this, right? I think it was Fritz who was talking about these systems that prioritize profit over people. And that's our reality, right? So if we think about that, we think about those inequalities and then highlight the stories of the people who are impacted the most, we are going to go such a long way, I think, a lot faster and in a more meaningful way than we are if we only focus on the data or we only focus on the science. And so I think it's really important that when we talk about those platforms, we think about how we want as a community. And so that's kind of what my work at Lead Now comes in. Basically, we are a nonprofit advocacy organization that is member-led. So we respond to what our members want, and we really, like, our main pillars of focus are that we all deserve a healthy environment, we all deserve a just society, a fair economy, and an open democracy, and that we all have to exercise our democracy. So what we do is basically we provide tools to folks to mobilize, and we meet them wherever they are. We have obviously like petitions and their lower lift things. We have a lot of social media content, but we also have a lot of tools to engage directly with our leaders. That means writing to them, writing letters to the editor, calling your representatives, setting meetings up with them to really pass on that message of what it is that we care about. And we have hundreds of thousands of members across the country. And it's very important for us to really bring people together, again, meeting them where they're at, but then bringing them together and provide the tools. Because I think like what we were hearing also about earlier is like this idea of apathy when it comes to political engagement. A lot of times people are thinking, well, yeah, I mean, I know it's important and I show up and vote that one time, but then I'm not entirely sure what else to do, or I'm not entirely sure how to engage. And what we our main purpose is to actually provide those tools to make it as easy as possible to stay engaged, to, meet like-minded people who are doing that work. And so that's kind of like the background that we're doing. And I think the main principle would be to say, okay, we have enough to take for everyone, to take care of everyone. I think someone else was speaking about this, especially in the last year and a half. It's been proven that our leaders actually can mobilize really quickly to respond to a crisis. And so we want the same in terms of climate. So We are mostly working on campaigns around climate, just transition away from fossil fuels, obviously this just recovery, past COVID, and tackling income inequality. And so those are our focus. But again, because we're member-led, that means that we hear what the hundreds of thousands of people across the country care about. And then we campaign based on that, like long-term, short-term, and rapid response to whatever is happening. So that's a bit of that work we do. But I think just to bring us back to ourselves as youth, I think it's very important to remember that our skills are valuable. And I think a couple of people have raised this already, because I was one of those people who, before I was involved or active, I always had this perception that I needed a very specific set of skills. And I'm a designer. I mean, I went to art school. I did not see myself or my skills fitting into this sort of movement space before I even joined it. And I think I was held back by thinking, oh, but I don't have an environmental science degree. And I didn't go to like a fancy school that tells me all about climate science or anything like that. And really, that's such a misconception, because I think, like Tyler was saying earlier, the point of it, especially with youth and all the vibrant and creativity and like all the energy that we bring to the table, is that we all have very different skills and passions and interests, and that they're all extremely valuable to the movement. Doesn't matter what it is. I then found finally that connection between, design and art and climate, and just how important that is, how important it is for storytelling, how important it is for us to communicate our message through, beautiful design and art and bringing communities together. So I think that the two things that I would say that I wish are like the takeaways are obviously that all of our skills and passions are extremely valuable, and not just valuable, but needed in the movement. Like someone else was saying earlier, a lot of that work is unseen. We need the people who are cooking on the front lines. We need the artists, we need the builders, we need the scientists, we need the mathematicians, we literally need everyone. So I hope that that's the main takeaway, that no matter what those skills or passions are, they are needed in the movement. And that everything we fight for is connected. Like I said, we are really fighting against this massive status quo system that was built to really like push some of us down, prioritize the growth and profit of a few at the top. And we're fighting against that. So yes, individual action is extremely important, but we have to remember, like, these are big things. And so by showing up in advocacy spaces and like in the streets and in community, we actually are unstoppable. And so if we think about that as a collective, that our struggles are collective, that's how we win. And so I think that's just the main takeaway that I wish like you take with us, no matter what it is that your background is or what your skills are, there is a place for you in the movement. And if anything, as youth, I think we'll have a huge responsibility to show up with that creativity and that energy, because it is our future on the line. I think we all recognize that. And what I find is that we don't need an army of experts. What we need is just really passionate people who are willing to put all their energy and passion into really tackling these massive problems that we're facing. But I think the strength of it is like building really dignified communities that thrive, because we all have different skills and passions. And so that's the main thing that I would like to say. And just keep joining all these amazing movements and organizations. Like everyone's been speaking about 100 different ways to plug in. Folks have mentioned the upcoming election. We need to show up in mass numbers as the biggest voting bloc, but it doesn't end at the ballot box. We show up, we put our demands at the forefront, but it doesn't end there. Once the ballot box closes, we got to organize. And so that's the thing, and those are the tools that we provide, but just in general, like, it doesn't end at voting. That is just a first step to this bigger picture and bigger movement that is amazing. And it's, again, fueled with love and compassion and community. And so I really hope that you mobilize politically, but that you're also ready to, create community within this movement when we're fighting for climate justice.
Thank you so much, Nayeli. You touched on so many awesome and important aspects of what this cause is all about. what really touched me was that when you were saying you don't need a specific skill set, you just need to believe in it and have passion and go and do it. And I think that's something that we need to always remind each other about, that it's really, you can always train skills, but attitude and belief and dedication are something intrinsic to a person. And that's, if we find people like that, that's gold. So, again, thank you for highlighting that, as well as the amazing work that you're doing to really bring forward these solutions. I look forward to connecting on other projects. You have a great attitude, and I appreciate you spending time with us and sharing the work you're doing tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.